uh, mindfulness arrival practice, but tell us where you are joining us from, if you don't mind, in the chat bar. And it's always so great to see. So we have Brazil, Switzerland, California, Michigan, Chicago, New Jersey. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. And if you're just joining, please type into the chat bar where you're joining from. It's always so great to know where you're coming from. And as we already do here, we have a global audience. So welcome, everyone. My name is Rich Fernandez. I'm going to do introductions in a moment. But one of the things that we love to do as a community and as an organization at SIY Global and with our friends at Unlikely Collaborators is to do what we call an arrival practice. It's a attention style practice, a mindfulness style practice, 30 seconds in length, just to allow, as we like to say, our minds and our hearts and our bodies, whatever that means to you, to arrive in this moment together. We may be coming from other meetings, a set of other activities. So let's just take a moment if you'd like, if you care to join us. It's totally optional. But just take a moment to connect with your breathing, literally that sensation of the air coming in and out of your body. Noticing the breath, breathing in, aware that you're breathing in. Breathing out, aware that you're breathing out. Connecting with the sensation of the breath, the sensation of the body. This is a way for us to arrive together in the present moment, our full attention and intention. And just note whatever it is that you are arriving with in your mind, in your heart, any expectations, any hopes, anything else that arises, anything on your mind, a to-do list, whatever it is, it's welcome. It's just a moment to notice what's present. Taking a final breath, if you will, anchoring in your body with your breath as we begin this time we have here together. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for that micro practice. Thanks for joining. If you did, if you haven't already, type in where you're joining from. We love to see where people in the world are joining from, and it's usually a very broad audience like this one. This is the Changemaker Forum presented by SIY Global. So the Changemaker Forum is a place where we speak with leaders pioneering efforts in transformational learning to have personal and social impact. And I'm delighted that our partner and friend Elizabeth Koch is joining us today. I'll introduce Elizabeth in a moment. My name is Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of SIY Global. If you're not familiar with us, we are a company that focuses on developing trainable, neuroscience-based emotional intelligence skills in organizations. And we had our origins at Google when SIY stands for Search Inside Yourself, like Google Search, but inside yourself. I was the head of executive education at Google and an early teacher of this methodology, which we really developed because I think at the time Google engineers didn't know that working with other humans was in their job description. So we had to develop some skills and capabilities around that. So emotional intelligence, mindfulness, neuroscience, all were the keys to that. That was 12 years ago. Since then, we started a nonprofit organization that teaches these skills. And then just a year and a half ago, roughly, we launched SIY Global, which is a benefit corporation. And we had the great good fortune to meet Elizabeth and her team at Unlikely Collaborators, who are partners, investors, collaborators. So that's SIY Global, that's me. But let me tell you about Elizabeth. I'm so delighted you're here, Elizabeth, my friend, business partner, collaborator. Over the past decade, Elizabeth has been doing the work of founding companies in the fields of publishing, of media, of neuroscience, and transformational experiences. These include Tiny Blue Dot Foundation, which to me, it's fascinating, their mission. They're a research foundation that seeks to understand and measure the quantity and quality of consciousness. That is a cool mission. Also, you were founder of Catapult, which is an award-winning publishing company celebrating extraordinary storytelling. And then most recently, Unlikely Collaborators, which creates unlikely collaborations through 4 areas, which we'll explain in a minute. Those being experiences, storytelling, investments, and impact. And all of Elizabeth's companies and activities share the same goal of bringing people's awareness of what she likes to call their perception box, which we will get into during this call as well. Elizabeth graduated from Princeton with a BA in English Literature. She earned her MFA, Master's in Fine Art, in Fiction from Syracuse University, where she was advised by George Sanders and won the Joyce Carol Oates Prize for short fiction. So that's your official bio, Elizabeth. But having just introduced you, I wonder if you might sort of tell us less formally about yourself and your journey. I'd love for the audience to hear directly from you on your journey. So tell us your story, please, my friend.
Sure. Do we have 1,500 hours? Because that's a long one. I'll try to do the short version of it. But before I even get into my story, Rich, I can't believe it's been a year since we were introduced by Kelly Boyes, who I'm sure some of you know. Amy Sandler, you're here. I know you know Kelly Boyes. She's a wonderful person. Oh, a little heart. And I mean, it was so early in our newest iteration of Unlikely Collaborators. It was just like a gift fell from the heavens. I mean,
both ways.
No-brainer. It was a no-brainer. We had the same vision for what the world could look like, the same method of going inward to help transform organizations and communities. We went straight down the silent meditation retreat wormhole, I think, in the first conversation. So
absolutely. I mean, just for everyone to know, so Elizabeth and team are investors in SOI Global and collaborators. We've been working together for the past year and almost a half. You are our first investor, like early in. And what happened was, we got to meet through a mutual friend, Kelly. And I remember when I came down to your office, we basically talked about human development, personal development, meditation. Like, we didn't even get to the business part of it until like the very last hour. I was like, I have to catch a flight. Are we talking about are we going to actually do like something together? And I think it does typify what I've come to learn about your deep interest and your extensive journey in those fields. Yeah. So maybe that's a great place to start, which is just tell us about how you got into this work and about what brought you here.
Yeah. Oh, good. That narrows it down. Thank you. So I think the best way to begin is just to say, ever since I was a little girl, I was obsessed with what made people tick. Like, why were they the way they were? What were kind of the stories they were telling other people about who they were? And like, I noticed there were some like differences in how people talked about themselves to other people in certain environments versus others. I was just like, what's going on here? There's so many weird stories going on. And part of it was because I was interested in how other people perceived me so differently than how I perceived myself. And there was so much variety. And I was like, what's going on? There didn't seem to be any consistency anywhere. And so I kind of got into my own tangle of stories that created a great deal of suffering, a lot of cognitive distortions, a lot of confusion. And in climbing my way out of that through a whole bunch of different modalities, which we can get into a moment if you want to, I started recognizing who I thought I was is not who I actually was, but it was these tools that I was engaging with. I mean, I'm a storyteller by nature. I got an MFA in fiction. I'm a creator. So I wanted to develop tools to help me understand myself more. And then I started sharing these tools with my friends in my spiritual community, and people were like, wait, I have that. Like, I personalize everything. Wait, I have black and white thinking. And I sort of naturally found myself kind of hosting little teeny tiny workshops for people, and then bigger and then bigger, and then creating curriculum. So it was really organic. Like, I thought I was going to spend my entire life sitting in a dark room by myself, writing fiction that would eventually like enlighten people. And that would be how I like earned my existence. But no, life had a different.
Well, you mentioned that you yourself, and I know this to be true, are a practitioner of these different modalities of, you might call them personal development, personal growth, spiritual development, whatever you want to call them. So what kind of modalities are we talking about? Like what?
Yeah, that's a big abstract word.
Yeah,
Um, okay, so we talked about silent meditation retreats.
yeah,
That
yeah.
was the first gigantic paradigm shift of my life, to realize, oh my God, I'm not these thoughts. I'm not these emotions. I can actually see them. I can get space from them. Well, like that transformed everything immediately. And so then once I had some space from these thoughts, then I could start investigating them. And that connected me with cognitive behavioral therapy. I could see where I was just like completely upside down in my spaceship, and what I was believing was true and what wasn't true. So that was hugely, hugely helpful. I did went really deep in that for a while. And then after that, way too long after that, I realized, wait, I have a body. The body has something to do with this too. And I got very interested in somatic experiencing and understanding how the thoughts in the mind connected with the physical sensations in the body are what make my stories feel so real. So unless I unglue those, then I'm just going to be trapped in the same cocoon or perception box, what the way I like to describe it. And so, it's interesting, the description you read about Tiny Blue Dot, the Consciousness Research Foundation I started, it did start as a consciousness research foundation, but that was to understand like the neural correlates to like what is consciousness and how is that created. That was so big and so abstract. And I quickly found that it wasn't helping people in their day-to-day lives. So now we're squarely focused and measuring perception box, like what happens when the perception box walls are very close neurologically, and what happens when they're expanded. And I can go more into perception box in a moment if you want to, but those are the modalities. There's a lot more, but those high level.
Okay. That's super helpful. And we will talk about perception box in a second. So I do want to say for the audience, though, if you're listening, if you have questions or you have comments, you have the chat bar available to you. And then we'll definitely make time at the end for 10, 15 minutes at least for Q&A directly, where you can unmute yourself and just join this dialogue. But what I'd like to do is just kind of continue to have a little bit of a dyad, a pair conversation at first here, just to kind of introduce everybody to this work that you're doing and really growing in the world. And so coming back to that, Elizabeth, we often talk about this sort of inside out journey, right? The only way forward is inward, all of these things that, and you talked about your own personal practices, from silent meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy, and so forth. But as I've come to know you and your team, you're also really have created, I think, a very clear, very direct, and very potent way of approaching kind of our own growth edges, each of us as people, through this perception box work. And you said a little phrase a minute ago that was really funny. You said, I was upside down in my spaceship, just kind of out of sorts in my own kind of mind and body and heart as I make my way in the world, is how I understood that. Perception box really speaks this, but tell us about that. Tell us about perception box. What is perception box? Why is it something that is so important to you and your team? Just tell us more details about it.
Yeah. So perception box it's a term that I coined for something that is not new at all. Philosophers have been talking about what I describe as perception box since BC. Neuroscience has research that's backed up that we're all in our own kind of personal reality bubbles for a very long time now. In fact, there's a Nova series, just a 2-part series that came out recently called Perception Deception, filled with these like wonderful neuroscientists who tell these great stories, and there's all this research in it. So if you're interested in going deep in the science of perception box, I highly recommend Perception Deception. But so it's very simply, it's this invisible mental box that every human being lives inside that distorts our perceptions. It distorts our ability to understand other people, to see them clearly, definitely to connect with them in a clean, pure way, and to understand ourselves, to understand our own motivations, and to understand our own assumptions, because it's built from the material of our beliefs, cognitive biases, our cognitive distortions. And no one is immune. We all are living in perception boxes, and they're not bad. Like the way I describe it, it can sound like, oh, it's horrible. We need to bust out of our perception box. We can't. It's a reducing valve from all the like infinity content that's out there to be able to navigate our world and navigate our relationships. But we can have agency over where the walls are, whether the walls are really close. That means we're believing a lot of untrue things about ourselves and other people, and we feel separate and we feel distant and like kind of like people are a threat. I lived for a long time with my perception box walls like this. And then what are the tools that we can use that you all teach so well? I mean, it's part of why we resonate with your work so much. You teach tools, emotional intelligence, resilience, that help expand people's walls so we can understand our motivations, connect with others, connect with our work, connect with our communities. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So what I'm also I've come to understand, and the way you're describing it, like when the perception box, the walls, as you said, are really close, and the perception box is really closed or small, it sounds like it causes a lot of suffering, a lot of pain.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Why is
You feel isolated, you feel separate, you feel like no one can see you clearly, you can't see yourself clearly. Mainly what it does is for me personally, and from what I've seen in the workshops I've facilitated, it makes people feel like it puts them almost in a shame place. Like I don't want to share what's actually happening to me because others will judge it. And then, and because others are a threat, they're a threat to my sense of safety and my sense of feeling okay within myself. It makes us feel like everything is a threat.
It's like a cognitive distortion, almost like a mental distortion of reality. Sounds like that we live and believe.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you really do connect this a lot to neuroscience. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well? Like how and why science is important in sort of this formulation of a perception box?
Well, search inside yourself is really in science too, aren't you? Why is it important to you all?
Well, I think so that for us, it's because we try to approach things from, and granted, this is a very it's a very specific approach. There's many other approaches you could take to this, right? You can take spiritual approaches, theoretical approaches, humanistic approaches, but we take a more scientifically, empirically grounded approach to a lot of the practices we teach, because we're really interested in how the brain and the body contribute to things like emotional intelligence, which includes things like the ability to focus, to direct and harness attention, to generate creativity and the conditions for creativity, to create the conditions for empathy and compassion. A lot of those are really rooted, actually, there's neural foundations for all of that. And those neural networks can be activated and trained and strengthened. And so we did have our origins at Google. We do a lot of our work in contemporary business settings, where people are really hungry for these tools, but also want to know the validity of them from a scientific basis, so that they're not just kind of trying some random flavor of the day, but in some ways it sort of strengthens and validates the case for. Well, what's funny is we used to say at Google, the engineers would come for the neuroscience, but they would stay for the meditation and the community that resulted from the practices. I think it was my friend and former SIY Silly board member, Silly is Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, Bill Duane, who used to say that all the time because he was an engineer at Google. And he said, yeah, the engineers, they all come for the neuroscience because it's fascinating. Neural correlates of attention, neural correlates of emotional intelligence, activate them, strengthen them, neuroplasticity. Tell me about that. I want that. But the actual experience of it is so powerful and useful and practical and then that's what they wind up really spending the bulk of the time cultivating. I know that's a perception box too. I kind of answered your question because you kind of handed it.
But it's so perfect. I mean, again, why we're collaborators and partners and great deal. But I mean, I hear you saying you almost have to Trojan horse in the heart work and the We don't have to
Yeah,
call it spiritual. We can just call it like the expanding perception work by grounding it in data that says, I mean, like you're a for profit. It's
yeah,
your clients are for profit organizations. They have a bottom line. They're not
yeah,
going to take a leap of faith with their team. So
yeah,
let's answer that. It's all true. Both are
yeah.
true. It does open your heart and it does help the culture of an organization, helps everyone get along better. It makes people feel like more empowered in their role, and it helps the bottom line. It does all that. So, like, why not present them with something that will onboard them?
Exactly. And, I do want to just say, though, that it's less, I would say, Trojan horsing it, the model of Trojan horse, like it's being presented as one thing, but it's really another thing. Because in this sort of neuroscience-based approach to mindfulness, emotional intelligence, perception box, I would say there is no deception involved here. There is no pretending it's one thing, but really offering another thing. It's all one thing,
It's
which is a set of tools and practices that trains and changes the mind and body. And we can both practice it and measure it. That's all. And so we kind of present the full package. That is one particular approach. Again, that's the approach we take because we try to speak the language and use the frameworks that are familiar with people in what I might describe as, a analytical, empirically based, rationally based business settings. And we offer a similar approach with a really strong experiential learning component that also touches into the truth about that derives actually from the neuroscience and from all of the behavioral research. I know that's true perception box.
this was my perception box. I mean, like, thanks for calling me out on it because I have walked into workshops where people were all sitting here like this.
Mhm, mhm.
And like they were because they thought it was going to be some like heart opener thing and they didn't want that. They would just like, why am I here anyway? And in the beginning, I was like, okay, I got to change gears. So I just like loaded them with research and the neuroscience and like why we're doing this. And then they started leaning in. And at the end, I think I've actually told you this before, but we ended the experience with a version of Just Like Me, which I don't know what it's called now, crying
Yeah.
men. These like these, investment bankers. They're like, what just happened? I'm like, that if I had told you, if I had led with that, you all would have ran out of the room. Like, I don't want to cry. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And for those that aren't familiar, Just Like Me, it's a version of, we call it seeing similarities. It's a version of, it's sort of a deep empathy exercise
yeah.
where you connect sort of with the innate humanity of somebody else in an experiential exercise in a work setting. So, and it's possible. Again, these are some of the skills that we're not trained on in business school, that we're not sort of the most forward intuitive skills in a business setting, but are more essential than ever. But rather than continuing to talk about it and describe it at a conceptual level, I think, Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind, I know you have some shorter perception box style exercises that allow people to have a little bit of an experience of this very idea that we're talking about, these concepts. So would you mind just maybe guiding us in a practice around perception box for a few minutes here?
I would love to. Thank you for inviting me to, because this is really my favorite part. I don't think of myself as like a talking head. I really enjoy the experiences. And I'm sure Search Inside Yourself agrees, and you all are facilitators, you're not talking heads. We probably agree that it's going inside where transformation happens, not just someone talking to our conscious mind. So if you're all willing, this is a super fast one. It's like 3 minutes and it's a visualization that will put you in touch with, let's just do it. Let's just do it. So if you're comfortable closing your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes and sit back in your chair and just relax. Let your arms just hang gently by your side. Let your jaw just hang gently open and exhale all the air out. Now inhale through your nose to a count of 4, 3, 2, 1, and exhale out your mouth to a count of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now imagine a person that you're having a difficult time with seated in front of you. Just bring them to mind. I need to note this is not someone who has invaded your boundaries in any way. This is someone that you, on some level, could be even a minor level, feel shut down to. So picture this person. Now this person is going to speak to you. If you believe in higher selves or souls, that's the version of the person who wants to connect with you, the higher self version of this person. So first, let them tell you their perspective, why they do the things they do. Let them tell you the personal need that's motivating their behavior, and be sure and really picture them speaking directly to you in your mind. Don't just think about it. And feel what emotions are coming up for you as they speak. Whatever emotions are there, just let them come up. Now let them tell you the challenges that they struggle with that you don't ordinarily see. Let them tell you what burdens they're carrying. And if you're thinking, well, I don't know any of that, I don't even know them that well, the details don't matter. What matters is that every human being has suffered, and this person is no different. So let them tell you what burdens they're carrying. Now let them tell you what they ultimately want more than anything, and not just for themselves, what they want for others, what they want for the whole world. Now let them ask you what you ultimately want. What do you care about more than anything? And picture them listening to your answer with genuine interest and care. Gently open your eyes and just notice if there was even a subtle shift in your attitude towards your person, even a subtle one. Because as I'm sure most of you know, neuroscientists have found that short visualizations like this one expand our mental models, expand our hearts, expand what I call our perception boxes. So I hope you felt a little bit of a shift in that short time.
Definitely. I did. I guess I'm speaking that out loud. I said that out loud. I definitely did. And by the way, those of you that are listening, feel free to chat any thoughts or responses, reactions you had in the chat bar, but
Hearts.
definitely shifted.
Hearts.
Yeah, a lot of hearts. It definitely shifted my, I would call it relational, like nature towards this person, and my perception actually, it's really powerful.
Good.
They're doing what they're doing, and I had a different level of understanding. So thank you. That was.
Can I actually tell you, because you and I have had so many conversations about perception box and so many conversations about like the workshops that we're up to and like what unlikely collaborators is. I'm a storyteller. Can I tell a story that
Please.
hopefully will illustrate what we mean by unlikely collaborators? Because really, and you all are so deep in this work, what we mean is it's a paradox. Because when your perception box walls are collapsed around you, it can feel like everyone's so different. Like everyone hates one. I mean, if you go on Twitter, when they're all like, ah. But if the walls are expanded, it's so much easier to see, like, of course we have differences. We have different backgrounds, different upbringings, different belief systems, different political beliefs. But beneath it all, we all want the same things. We want to see and be seen and love and be loved. So in 2019, I wanted to figure out a way to help audiences really connect with this inside themselves. So I went on a tour with a former child soldier from South Sudan. Have I told you this, Rich?
You told me this, but please tell everyone.
Okay. So his name is Emmanuel Jal, and he lived in Canada at the time. So the tour was through some major cities in the United States and through Canada. And on first glance, it's like, are you kidding? This privileged white chick from the Midwest And a former child soldier from South Sudan who at age 5 saw his entire village get burned down, saw his mother get murdered before his eyes. His father ran away, left him for dead. Instead, a tribe found him, handed him a gun, and said, "We're going to get vengeance on the people who did this for you." I mean, what could we possibly have in common? So, what we were showing audiences as we did this speaking and workshop tour was at the beginning, yeah, we have nothing in common. But as we get older in our stories, we're explaining how our perception box beliefs got built and how it contracted us more and more and more. And so by the end of the story, we're seeing not only that our perception boxes got built in a weirdly similar way, but then how we learned to expand them was weirdly similar. And now we have the same perspective on the challenges of the world and how to solve for them. And he calls me a sister. There's so much love between us. So we were trying to show that beneath it all, we're all just human beings struggling for connection and collaboration. And the workshop piece, I don't remember why this popped in my mind when you were talking earlier, but I'll get to it. It'll come back. But in the workshop piece, I had people, so we carefully cultivated the audiences to be a wide range of people who seem like they might not have anything in common. And then we had people partner with someone in the room who seemed very different from them. And by the end of the workshop, people were saying, "I feel closer to this person than I feel with members of my own family."
Mhm.
So we're just trying to help people see, like, no matter what, once our perception box walls expand, we're just human beings with
Yeah.
such similar struggles. And so you all at Search Inside Yourself, our tagline, which you mentioned earlier, is the only way forward is inward. And search inside yourself. It's right there in the title. So
Yeah.
all of you, we all believe the same thing. But I mean, just to have people have this experience of this unlikeliness isn't really that unlikely. We were hoping that people would go off into their lives, at work, at home, and have that little moment of like, if I could connect with that person, surely I can find a way to connect with this person and see things from their point of view.
Absolutely. In fact, if we look at these comments, I love some in the chat, Elizabeth. I mean, thank you for those who are commenting. I'd like to actually speak to 3 of them. Genevieve, hello in Switzerland, friend. Genevieve is one of our teachers at Search Inside Yourself. That was perfect timing for her. Look at Andrew's comment too. Hi, Andrew. Nice, simple practice. Thanks, Elizabeth. Even though I'm struggling to truly connect with this other person on a regular basis, it happens, right? There are difficult people. We experience people as difficult. That's our experience in life and work. Simply thinking about what they want, why they're doing what they're doing, felt more inspiring than draining.
Wow.
And I have a call with them right after this. And so I feel much better about it. So
that is so great. Thank you for taking the time to chat that out. That is really thrilling.
Totally. And then Tanya, if you could elaborate on the chat here, I can entertain the notion that this dialogue is possible. Like that, can you just elaborate on that, Tanya, on the chat if you're...
Yeah, I think she was referring to the story with me and Emmanuel.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that is the power of perception box work, that common humanity, that thread of common humanity is sort of alive and glowing almost in these types of practices and in the workshops, so that your organization, I happen to do some of these workshops like at your headquarters with some of your other collaborators who are completely like different organizations than we are, some nonprofits in the arts, prison, podcast and mindfulness organizations, media company. I remember there's a jewelry maker, just all walks of life, really. And we all had that experience kind of this common humanity. So when you think about unlikely collaborators, and again, just full disclosure, as I said in the beginning, you're a key investor in us, and we are a collaborator with you. And you told us about what drew you all to our work and mission. But what about others? When you look for collaborators, because you do support other organizations through experiences, storytelling, investments, and impact, right? When you're looking to partner with other entities, organizations, what are you looking for in terms of unlikely collaborators? What do you mean by that?
Well, number one, thank you for that question. That's it's an important question for me to actually keep in my mind a lot too, because we meet with so many powerful organizations, but there's two major bottom lines. One is they have to be in some way, shape, or form focused on perception box, on bringing awareness around the fact that we're all living in one. We all are living in our subjective reality bubbles, and helping people expand the walls to bring in more connection and possibilities for collaboration. That's number one. So, like I said, with Search Inside Yourself, that was super obvious. And number two, the leaders have to be in the work, have to be humble enough to recognize when I'm triggered, like maybe it's not everyone else's fault in the world. Maybe there's something going on inside of me that I need to take a look at. Maybe I'm part of what's happening here. And that was super obvious from you for in our first conversation too, the level of humility, the level of self-investigation that you do on an ongoing basis, Rich. So just to give you some sense of the range, I mean, you mentioned some of the people that were participating in that workshop, but I can offer some little descriptions of some of the other organizations so you can get a sense of the
Yeah,
range.
I think it's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, these are beautiful organizations. One is called Moral Courage, and some of you may have heard of it. It was founded by a Muslim LGBTQ woman named Irshad Manji. So beautiful. I was talking to her 2 days ago, actually. So they create workshops that are a form of conflict resolution. And they don't mean conflict resolution like getting people to all agree with one another. Instead, it's to get people to celebrate their differences, to celebrate the differences in opinions and lifestyle, and get to see that it's all in some way, shape, or form valid and important for us to evolve as a species, as a society, and how much more we can learn from one another if we lean in with curiosity rather than that like sense of threat that we were talking about earlier. So prison yoga, I think you maybe mentioned prison yoga. Prison yoga is not just physical asana practices that they're bringing into prisons. It's a lot of mindfulness training and mindfulness techniques. And it doesn't just focus on prisoners. It also focuses on the correctional officers. Can you imagine how much stress they're under, and brings in whole families to work with them too. So it's really 360 degrees. It's really beautiful. The moth. Have any of you experienced the moth? If you live in the Bay Area or anywhere in California, you might have. Have you been to the moth, Rich?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
storytelling organization that teaches people a particular way of telling stories that I personally find both very perception box expanding in the telling. It's sort of like they would never describe it this way, so don't tell them I said this, but I think of it as kind of a hero's journey story where there's a challenge and then you recognize something and then you grow. But as an audience member, your perception box expands just listening to these stories. I mean, oh, there's such heart openers. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, I think in all three of those instances, you said one of the first criteria is there is some connection to perception box work.
Yeah.
And I like to think about that broadly, because I remember thinking when I met you all, like, well, we don't do exactly the perception box, but we're talking about awareness-based practices.
Totally.
Like very simple, practical, as Andrew has said here, tools and approaches rooted in science to expand awareness. And I think you have a very potent model called perception box. We have Search Inside Yourself, but it is all this inward kind of like the only way, forward is inward, as you all like to say. Our tagline is search inward, lead outward, right?
Yeah.
Like it starts with that kind of inside out motion. So that really is a very common thread in all of these organizations that I've met and that you're mentioning as well.
And let me just throw in one more, because I mean, you're helping me remember to like sort of say very clearly, we don't just support organizations that lead workshops and that lead introspective experiences. For example, there's Uncuffed, which teaches prisoners how to run their own podcast from soup to nuts. So it can be but that's also, you can imagine, very perception box expanding. So
beautiful.
It's much more general than workshops only.
Yeah, it's very broad. So by the way, we're kind of at that moment, and you're seeing it in the chat bar about questions. Please feel free. Grace from our team, Grace Edmonds from our team, is sort of monitoring the chat and helping coordinate this entire event. So thank you, Grace, first of all, for doing that and for your great work here. But feel free, if you have questions, to chat them in or raise your hand, and let's just invite a bigger conversation here than just between myself and Elizabeth. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments you might want to make, just raise your hand, and Grace can also unmute you if you want to just be in conversation with us directly. If you prefer to chat it in, you can do that as well. So let us know what questions you have, and we'll continue. And as those filter in, as they come up, I think one question that I would have, based on everything we said, and rather than answering it myself, well, actually, here's a question from Facebook. Let me pause on my own question and just ask this question, because this is streaming across the platforms, social platforms as well. So here's a question from Facebook listener. What is an example of the way you use your perception box at work? How do you use it at your organization?
Oh, I love this question. Okay. We use it in so many ways. Like we're doing perception box investigation all day long. But okay, here's a good example, and it's also got a story connected to it, so it'll be easier to follow. We actually use something that we call perception box questions in recruiting and hiring. Everyone here is in the work, everyone. So the questions could be things like, who are you still trying to please? Who are you still rebelling against? When did your ego take a hit in a way that ultimately served you? Questions that are like, people are used to saying in job interviews what they're going to do in the first 90 days. And like, we ask the basic logistic questions, but we always ask a perception box questions to see how vulnerable people are willing to make themselves and how honest, not just the fake answer of like, well, I think my biggest challenge is I have too much empathy. Like, no, you're not getting away with that. Sorry. So we had a guy that came in a couple months ago, and I asked him the question, when has your ego taken a hit in a way that ultimately served you? Which actually shows you about my perception box, because to me, he seemed a little bit arrogant. And so he thought about it, and he said, I've got a big one. I've got a really big one. I had just gotten my degree from MIT. I think it was a master's in zoning and in city rehabilitation. And he's like, it was right after Katrina. I was going to go in there and like help with the whole city, help remake it. And I knew exactly what I was doing because I have this like fancy degree from MIT. So there's all these town halls, and I'm leading the town halls. And, there's a woman who I thought it was kind of just like a heckler who would come in and start shouting in the middle of the town halls, I want my house. I want my house. And she would just say it on repeat, and she would come every single town hall. And I'd be like, lady, you're going to get a house. You're going to get an amazing house. It's all good. It's good. Just settle down. And so, but she kept coming back and saying the same thing. So finally, after one of these town halls, he took her aside at the end and he said, is there something that I'm not understanding that you're saying? And she said, she looked him in the eyes and she grabbed his arms and she said, I don't want a house. I want my house. Mm-hmm. I want my memories. I want my home. And it like he said, it shook him to his core. He wasn't hearing her. He wasn't seeing her. He was projecting what he thought they needed and wanted on them. So he said, from then on, every time I go anywhere, have any kind of meeting where people are in trouble and need help, the first thing I do is I go around and I ask everyone why they're there and what they need. And if I don't understand what they're saying, I keep asking until I do. Like that blew my mind. And he said, it's changed me forever. So that's the power of some of these questions. Like, hiring is difficult. Got to make sure people are they're not just talking the talk, they're invested.
Yeah, exactly. We like to say, that they're integrating and embodying the practices. Great, thank you. That's a really powerful story. There's a couple of other questions. I think I'll go to Mark's first, which is what are potential future events and tools that Silly or Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and also in our case, SIY Global, which are both two sister organizations, also both supported by Unlikely, and Unlikely collaborators, will be doing. More of this, please. Thank you, Mark. That's very complimentary and kind. Well, I mean, another thing that we can share is you just told me that you moved into your incredible new space, which we foresee programming happening there. Maybe I'm speaking for you, Elizabeth, but I know, because I know, and speaking to Zach and Lisa and your team, I know that the intention is to invite the Unlikely collaborators in your network to actually have programming there and events 100%. For the public and media things like this.
Classes, even classes, events, workshops.
Yeah.
To do videos, we have a whole production space we're trying to build for sure.
Yeah,
but Rich, do people know what?
I was just going to say. See,
okay.
You tell. It's your space.
No, but what we're doing together.
Oh,
that little thing. Okay, so secret's out. We are, Rich is figuring out how to take the Unlikely collaborators perception box workshop content. Some of it's like 6 weeks long, like very long-winded Elizabeth, like workshop all day long things, and turning them into more micro experiences that fit more squarely what Search Inside Yourself is trying to cultivate in work environments. I mean, there's already so much crossover, but like Rich is going to make it much more compatible with emotional intelligence and resilience and mindfulness in a way that will really support your corporate clients. And I'm very excited about this. It's not going to be forced on anyone. There's no, you have to, but we'll figure out a way to make it something that hopefully will support the work that you're doing in a slightly different way.
Well, it's already happening. And by the way, I am not doing it. The incredible team here Global's doing it, Ryan and Shivani and Caitlin and the product team and Brandon and, and then all the other teams at SIY Global. So are kind of crafting more micro courses around Perception Box. And you don't even know this, so I'll just share it with you live as well, which is we had just been testing. We have this design thinking process where we quickly prototype some experiences and learning programs, and then we test them with real life clients who volunteered and or potential clients. And these are business people. So we started creating an executive retreat. This is for leaders in organizations to do that kind of inner work that also leads to success in their organizations and better leadership, and also just better well-being and kind of solves all of those things: personal growth, leadership growth, organizational growth.
So exciting.
So we actually tested a Perception Box sort of micro segment, and they loved it. They were like, where can I learn more? What are the tools exactly? How can I start to onboard this? So
wait, when did this happen? And you're just
happened like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Ryan was facilitating a design sprint, and then we had these executives, and we were literally agnostic. We said, we have this thing on the executive retreat. It's called Perception Box. It helps you understand your own, we just positioned it as, thinking patterns, cognitive biases, mindsets. Would this be useful was the question to them.
Wow.
When you look below the level of like strategy and business model, when you look below the level of leadership and the competencies of leadership, when you look at you as a person and what makes you tick, is it useful to explore that thing? And we kind of used your definitions that we're calling Perception Box. And they're like, oh yeah, how do I do that? That's really intriguing. So it's going to be a feature in our executive retreat. That's an example. And this is a little bit to answer Mark's question too. But newsflash to you, public service announcement to you and team.
Wow, that is so exciting. My team, they're watching somewhere. I'm sure they're all cheering.
Yes, so more to come, but the intention really is to expand this work, and then through your headquarters because there's a huge space in LA. Okay, I'll just say it. There's a beautiful space you renovated in Santa Monica that is sort of a state-of-the-art workshop and media and all sorts of incredible learning infrastructure. And the intention there, to answer Mark's question, is to hold events that are sort of collaborations between SIY and Perception Box Unlikely collaborators. So stay tuned for that.
Yes.
And then we
Zoom
have,
is great, but we really want nervous systems to gather
yeah,
and all of our different collab. I mean, can you imagine just the list of different organizations that I was describing before being in the same space,
right.
like the sharing knowledge, sharing tools, sharing love, sharing beer, sharing everything, and just feeling like there's actually a community hub where people can go who all have the same North Star, who all care about the same thing, but are going at it in very different ways. That's really kind of our dream.
100%. And to answer another question from Facebook, then I'm going to ask Tanya to ask her question directly. Question from Facebook is, what have you noticed in people's experiences in perception box workshops? Any interesting stories to share? I'm going to answer that one. Well, you can answer. I have my answer because I went through.
You answer, and then I want to tell a story. Okay.
Well, the prison podcast collaborators, Shakur was the name of one of my partners, and he was talking about how perception box helped him, and he had been he had just gotten out of jail after 35 years, I believe.
Literally, it had been just weeks. He was out just for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how perception box work helped him understand the mental models he was kind of living by, if you will, and how those shifted over time. And now he's drawing on that ability to harness perception box to navigate life afterwards, his contemporary life. And he's feeling really like resourced and equipped to do it because of the perception box tools he has. So that's a very quick, I'm talking about like a 2-day experience where I really bonded with Shakur because we were partners and buddies in some of the exercises, but just an example of some of the stories and impact. I don't know if you have other ones, and then I'm going to ask Tanya to share as well.
Yeah. So there's one story that's kind of top of mind, and it's an organizational story. So you've experienced two of our workshops. One was what I think you think about me, and then the other was seeing the potential in others, which is more for organizations. And so we hosted that one recently for the Red Cross. And that was a 6-week course. It was a deep dive on day one, and then there were Zoom calls afterwards. So there's this woman who shares on a Zoom call, and she starts crying. I mean, you can imagine these people, the amount of stress people are under. It's like, it's such intense work. And this was a field facilitator or field supervisor. And she starts sharing, and she's crying. And then she's apologizing profusely. She's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, Josie, not her real name. Josie, why are you crying? It's totally fine. I mean, you're talking about something that's completely heart-wrenching. She's like, no. In my line of work, you can't cry. And I said, why not? And she said, because it shows people you're weak. You have to be strong for the people that you're supporting. You can't show emotions like that. And I'm looking around the Zoom room. Everyone's nodding. They all agree with her. And I'm like, well, how's that working out for you? And she said, I'm completely burnt out. I'm exhausted. And I resent the people I'm trying to help. And then she starts crying again. I'm like, Josie, here, I'm going to give you some tools. We've got 2 weeks. Just see if you can, engage some of these perception box tools, and, just try. Just see if you can bring your whole self, like allow yourself to have some emotions. And so she went away, came back. I sort of forget. I'm leading the workshop. She comes off mute and she said, Elizabeth, I have to tell you something. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to share right now. And I said, go ahead. And she said that she, in that 2-week period, had responded to a house fire, and it was completely devastating. And so she was working with the family and, providing supplies. And she said, I let myself cry. And she described, what the process was for her that she enabled her to allow, but it was very much perception box tools. And she said the family she was helping would not stop hugging her. And they said, thank you so much for caring.
Yeah.
You actually care as a human. You're not just throwing water and food at us. And so then she's like, I could just see in her face how joyful she is. And she said, not only that, the volunteers also came up to me afterwards and said, thank you so much for giving us permission to show emotions, because I don't know how to hold back. I've been watching you and I don't know how to do that. But now I feel like I can actually do this work. And so I said, well, how do you feel now in general? And she said, I'm so much more energized. I have renewed passion for the work that I'm doing. It is such a relief. And I was watching in the Zoom room, people were all taking it in and listening and absorbing it. And so, I mean, this is so much of the work that you all Search Inside Yourself facilitators do. The recognition that one person has a breakthrough in a corporate environment or organization and shares it, the reverberations go throughout the entire
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. And being your authentic, true,
Whole
to
self.
yourself, whole self. Exactly. It's a beautiful story, and a beautiful story about the impact of being your whole self. Now, we have very little time left, and I was wondering, I would like to, if we could have Tanya come off of mute and unmute Tanya. And Tanya, hi, and thanks for raising your hand, and you have a question, so please.
Hi, I'm not sure what time it is there, but hello. Anyway, speaking of reverberation, I was so fortunate to be able to work with SIY during the pandemic. I don't have a corporation. I'm simply a speech provider for the Department of Education and here in New York. And I heard recently, well, it's on the news and everything, that Mayor Adams is advocating breathing for our children. And I know the SIY tools and some of the things that, were so purposeful and so meaningful. And I was breathing with my kids during the pandemic, and it got us through the pandemic. I was terribly impressed by anything that, quells my anxiety that doesn't have a label. So, I wanted to know, would there be, are you all still supporting the Department of Education? And, if not, I mean, what are there workshops available where I can just learn how to engage with them, not in a perfunctory way, but in a meaningful and purposeful way, so that their breathing means something. I mean, it always means something. Breath means life, but I mean, in the context of what it's supposed to be doing for them.
Yeah, and so thank you, Tanya, so much for that, and the encouragement to continue to support our educators and the students in the school systems with these tools. And one of the things that evolved with our organizations is Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which the acronym is SIYLI or silly.org, currently supports K through 12 education. We've supported whole ministries of education in countries like Bhutan, and their team at silly.org continues to, and here in the chat, you see the website link. And then I just also sent out the info at, you can email if you wanted to learn more and ask for any possibilities and events. So absolutely, that's more on the mission of the .org side. SIY Global is the .com side. It's a for-profit. It's funded partially by Elizabeth and team. And we focus on business to business. So we focus on delivering these tools in organizations, usually more in the business settings. But we're sister organizations, .org.com, SIYLI.org, and then SIYglobal.com. So thanks for that question. And I think our time is coming to an end. We only have a minute. There's a few other questions around creativity, supporting folks who are with neurodiversity. And the answer is yes and yes to both those questions, that these tools and practices are adapted for neurodiverse audiences in certain aspects. And then also there are things we're doing around creativity to apply these tools to the creative and innovation process. Even here at SIY Global, for example, we are creating a course called Inclusive Innovation. So bringing in, a little bit of an inclusion lens to design thinking and innovation, so that all voices are heard, all perspectives are incorporated using all of these tools. But Elizabeth, we could probably keep talking for a whole other hour. There's the infinite amount of things we can touch on, but I just really want to thank you, not only for your time here, because this was an hour of your time, but really for the decades of experience that you have been living and practicing. And then from those practices, making this offering and this commitment to the world, really to create Perception Box, Unlikely Collaborators, and all the good work you're doing. So from the bottom of
my greatest pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you all, you facilitators. I know, I admire you all so much. I know how emotionally toiling it can be. I know how challenging it can be. I celebrate each and every one of you for being so incredibly dedicated and so in the work yourself, because you could not facilitate this if you weren't up to your eyeballs in unpacking your own stuff. So thank you all so much. We're together, we're going to change the world.
Yes, thank you. And you'll get a recording of this as well, since you registered for it. So thank you, everybody.
Rich,
Thank you,
it was
Elizabeth.
so
Thank
fun.
you for
Thank
being
you so
here.
much.
See you next time, and onward and deeper together.
100%.